Taranaki. On a clear day, you can see the mountain, walk along beautifully maintained pathways, enjoy strategically placed sculptures, or wander through beautiful gardens. There are restaurants, art galleries, beaches, and productive farmland. It is one of the jewels of modern New Zealand. But it was not always like that. In the early 1800s, Taranaki was occupied by 8 different iwi, with Te Atiawa occupying the area around present-day New Plymouth. Ngāti Mutanga and Ngāti Tama occupied the land to the north, and Taranaki, Ngāti Ruahine and Ngāti Ruanui occupied the land to the south. Further north, Kawhia was home to Ngāti Toa, led by Te Raupraha, while the Waikato Federation, led by Te Wherewhere and Rewi Maniapoto, was further inland. Ngāti Whātua was to the north of the Waikato. For Māori, it was a prime location. The land was fertile, the rivers and the sea teemed with kaimoana. Then, in 1817, Te Raupraha formed an alliance with Ngāti Whātua, Ngāti Tama and Te Atiawa to obtain utu against the Taranaki iwi by attacking their pa at Tata Raimaka. Ngāti Whātua had 2 muskets, which allowed them to shoot the Taranaki rangatira from a position overlooking the pa. With their resistance crippled by just 2 muskets, the pa fell. The musket wars had arrived in Taranaki. In the same year, Te Wherewhere's father-in-law, Tukarehu, allied with Ngāti Whātua to undertake a massive invasion of the lower North Island. Called Amiowhenua, or the encircling of the land, they travelled east down through the Wairarapa and on to Wellington, before returning up the Kapiti coast, through Whanganui and on up the Taranaki coast. On arriving in Taranaki, they attacked and occupied the Ngā Pukerangiora Pa, where they were held under siege by Te Atiawa, before a subhapu of Te Atiawa allowed them to relocate to a safer location in the Pukerangiora Pa, high up on the south side of the Waitara River. The siege was then continued by Te Atiawa, Ngāti Tama, Ngāti Mutanga, and also aided by Te Raupraha and his Ngāti Rarua allies. However, one of the besieged Waikato warriors succeeded in breaking out and running up the coast to Kawhia to warn Te Wherewhere that his father-in-law, Tukarehu, was trapped in the Pukerangiora Pa. Te Wherewhere assembled an army, and after an epic battle with Te Raupraha, he succeeded in rescuing his father-in-law. However, the losses sustained demanded utu, which would be delivered with devastating results 5 years later. In early 1822, Waikato was invaded by a powerful Ngāpuhi war party led by Hongi Hika, and this effectively prevented Te Wherewhere from pursuing utu against Te Atiawa for their losses at Pukerangiora until after they had made peace with the Ngāpuhi in 1826. During the siege at Pukerangiora, Te Atiawa were divided on their attitude towards Waikato. Some had given them a safe haven in the Pukerangiora Pa, while others attacked the Pa in an attempt to exterminate the invaders. So in 1826, when 2 Atiawa rangatira were killed by Ngāti Ruanui, some Te Atiawa requested help from Te Wherewhere to gain utu for the killings. The Taranaki and Ngāti Ruanui iwi had no defence against the Waikato muskets, and many were killed or enslaved. The fighting then continued down the coast as far as Waitotara, resulting in most of the Taranaki iwi migrating to the Kapiti coast in 1827. Only around 120 men and their families stayed behind in the Tinamu Pa near Opunaki. Even though Waikato helped Te Atiawa gain utu against the Taranaki and Ngāti Ruanui iwi, Te Wherewhere and his father-in-law Tukurehu still demanded utu for their losses 9 years earlier when Te Wherewhere rescued Tukurehu, who had been trapped in the Pukerangiora Pa. By December 1831, the time had come. Te Wherewhere assembled more than 2,500 warriors, armed with muskets from all the Waikato sub-tribes, and he led his war party down the coast towards Taranaki. His first stop was at Uranui, where he captured the Ngāti Mutanga Pa. Many were killed and eaten. On seeing this, Te Atiawa panicked and fled to the safety of the Pukerangiora Pa. However, they didn't have time to take sufficient food to support the 4,000 who ended up inside. Waikato began the attack on the 3rd of February 1832, beginning a siege that would last for a few weeks before the starving Te Atiawa abandoned the Pa. In desperation, dozens hurled themselves over the 100-metre-high cliff into the Waitara River. Over 1,000 were killed or captured. Only a few escaped. This was followed by days of feasting, with prisoners being brought out to be tortured, killed and eaten. No account was taken of those who had helped Tukurehu previously. Any Te Atiawa man with a moko was decapitated and his head was displayed on a pole. When the sister of 2 of these men saw her brother's heads, she criticised some Waikato warriors for their lack of gratitude and was promptly thrown alive into one of the ovens. Te Wherewhere personally executed around 150 of the captives. The Waikatos then moved on to attack the Ngamotu Pa in modern-day New Plymouth. This was defended by only 350 Te Atiawa, but helped by 11 Europeans who had 3 small cannon. The siege lasted for 3 weeks and finally ended after multiple charges on the barricades had been repulsed, leaving behind around 350 dead and wounded Waikatos. Then Te Atiawa took vengeance on the wounded, with many being burned alive and eaten. Even though Waikato had failed to take the Ngamotu Pa, the remaining Te Atiawa were too weak to defend themselves against the inevitable return, given Waikato's huge advantage in numbers and musket firepower. Consequently, many of the northern Taranaki iwi decided to migrate south to be reunited with their relatives in Otaki, Wellington and Queen Charlotte Sound. Many joined up with Te Raupraha, who was beginning his campaigns against Ngāi Tahu in the South Island. The following year, in 1833, Te Wherewhere assembled another war party of around 800 warriors to once again seek utu for the loss sustained in Taranaki. He began a siege of the Mikatahi Pa in New Plymouth, where some 300 Te Atiawa were seeking refuge. However, the Pa was situated on an island, making it nearly impregnable, and which also allowed the inhabitants to receive food supplies at night from the Tinamu Pa further down the coast. The siege finally concluded when Koropiko, a Waikato woman who was married to one of the Te Atiawa men, managed to travel back to her relatives in Kawhia to broker a peace agreement. Some of the Te Atiawa rangatira agreed to live in Kawhia as slaves, while the remainder either moved south to the Tinamu Pa or joined the Ngāti Tama migration to Amiowhenua. Te Wherewhere then continued down the coast to attack the Tinamu Pa, just north of Opunaki. Outnumbered and faced with the massive firepower possessed by Waikato, and with only 1 musket held by their rangatira, Te Matakatea, it must have seemed hopeless. However, their Pa was well positioned with high palisades, and they had an inexhaustible supply of large boulders that they were able to hurl down the steep slopes leading up to the pa whenever Waikato attacked. Te Matakatia also used his one musket to good effect, picking off the Waikato rangatira with great accuracy. Over 60 Waikato were killed before they abandoned their attack. After celebrating their victory, Te Matakatia decided to move south to the twin Ngāti Ruanui Pas in Waimate. Waikato pride couldn't accept yet another defeat in Taranaki, so in early 1834, Te Whewhewha led another massive war party of 2,500 warriors to avenge their earlier defeats. With northern Taranaki depopulated, they moved down the coast to besiege the Te Ruaki Pa just north of Hawera. After some months, the starving occupants finally surrendered and were taken as slaves. Te Whewhewha then continued south to attack the twin Waimate Pas on either side of the Kapuni River mouth. Here he was not so successful. Once again, Te Matakatia was successful in picking off Waikato rangatira, and following some successful counterattacks, Te Whewhewha finally agreed to peace negotiations, acknowledging Taranaki's courage, and especially Te Matakatia's prowess. He declared in the presence of all the Waikato rangatira present that his assaults on Taranaki had now ended and the peace would be binding. However, 8 years of Waikato invasions had left most of the Taranaki coast desolate. Most of the survivors then migrated south to the Kapiti coast or to the north of the South Island. Just a few stayed back, hiding in the depths of the forest or living on the Sugarloaf Islands. The northern coast of Taranaki would now remain mostly deserted until European colonisation by the New Zealand Company began 7 years later in 1841. Disputes over colonisation in Taranaki, combined with the rise of the King movement, would lead directly to the New Zealand Wars. The newly developed settler farms in Taranaki would be devastated. The entire Māori economy in the Waikato would be destroyed, and the positive feelings between Māori and Pākehā that were so eloquently expressed at the Kohimarama conference would be eroded away. I will cover this in my next podcast. Now be sure to click on the subscribe button if you haven't already. The land wars and confiscations that followed were a massive turning point in our history, and I'll be exploring why Governor Grey decided to invade Taranaki, the Waikato and the Bay of Plenty. Could he have found a better solution? We'll see all of the advice that he got, and then you get to decide.